My name is Lila Morgan. I'm 30 years old, 7 months pregnant, and the night my family gathered to celebrate our new home, everything I believed in fell apart. The candles flickered against the walls, soft music playing, laughter everywhere. For a second I thought, this is what happiness feels like. Then my sister, Elaine, walked up to the microphone. She smiled, calm, certain, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said. "From this moment, I'm the rightful owner of this house. And Lila, you need to leave." The music died. The room froze. Every eye turned to me. I felt the air leave my body, like the walls had suddenly closed in. And when I looked at Ethan, my husband, he just stood there. No words, no protest, no hand reaching for mine. Only silence. That silence, it hurt more than her words. Because sometimes betrayal isn't loud, it's quiet. It hides in the eyes of someone who chooses not to defend you. I placed my hand over my belly, feeling the tiny heartbeat that didn't know its world had just cracked open. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out, only the weight of disbelief. Have you ever felt that? That hollow stillness when people you love act like strangers? That's what it felt like. Standing there, surrounded by faces I thought were safe, and realizing I was completely alone. Maybe that's why I'm sharing this now. Because I know I'm not the only one who's ever been betrayed by family. If you've ever trusted someone and they broke that trust, tell me in the comments. Your story matters. And sometimes, saying it out loud is the first step to taking your power back. I didn't cry that night. I just stood there, holding my breath, pretending I still belonged in that room. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because what waited beyond that silence wasn't just pain. It was a double betrayal. One from the sister who took my home, and the husband who let her. 6 months before that night, my life looked picture perfect. Ethan and I had just signed the papers for our first home, a cozy 3-bedroom house in Albuquerque with sunlight that poured through every window. I used to sit on the living room floor, tracing the sunlight on the walls, whispering to the tiny life growing inside me, "This is where we'll start fresh." For the first time in years, I believed in tomorrow. Ethan seemed happy too. At least, he looked the part. He'd come home with takeout, kiss my forehead, and talk about baby names between bites of pasta. We'd argue playfully over paint colors. He wanted gray, I wanted soft yellow. He joked that yellow would make the baby think too much. I laughed, not knowing how prophetic that joke would become. Then my sister, Elaine, started visiting. At first, it felt harmless. She was my only sibling, and I thought she was trying to reconnect. She'd bring candles, curtains, little housewarming gifts. But soon her visits stopped feeling kind. They started feeling invasive. She'd wander into rooms without asking, open drawers, comment on how I still had a lot to learn about managing a house. Once, she stood by the window and said, almost absently, "It's beautiful, Lila. I just hope you can keep up with the mortgage." The words stung more than I let on. I brushed it off, hormones, stress, overthinking, but she kept coming. Once, I came home from a doctor's appointment and found her measuring the living room curtains. When I asked how she got in, she said, "Oh, Ethan gave me a key. He said I could help with decorating." My heart dropped. That night, I confronted Ethan. He looked up from his phone, sighed, and said, "She's just trying to help, Lila. You're reading too much into it." Maybe I was. Or maybe I was the only one paying attention. I started noticing the small things, the way Ethan smiled at his phone, the sudden late nights, the text alerts he'd swipe away when I entered the room. He'd tell me it was work. I wanted to believe him, but every time he turned away, something inside me whispered, "You're losing him." One Saturday afternoon, Elaine showed up unannounced. Again. I was folding baby clothes when I heard the front door open. She walked in like she owned the place, holding paint samples. "I'm thinking a deep navy for the nursery," she said. "Something strong." I stared at her. "Elaine, this is my home." You don't get to decide how I paint my child's room. She smiled, too calmly. Relax, Lila. I'm just helping. You'd be surprised how much of this place I'm actually invested in. Invested in. The phrase hit me like a slap. She hadn't paid a cent toward this house, but the way she said it, casual, confident, made me wonder if she believed her own lie. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ethan was next to me, breathing evenly, his phone screen lighting up the dark. A message flashed. Elaine, did you tell her yet? My stomach turned cold. He rolled over before I could see more. For hours I lay there staring at the ceiling, one hand resting over my belly, trying not to cry. Something was happening between them, something more than I was ready to admit. I wanted to believe I was just tired, hormonal, imagining things, but deep down I knew the truth had already started writing itself behind my back. People say betrayal starts with one lie. In my case, it started with a key, one Ethan handed to my sister without telling me, and that single key would soon open more than just a door. It would open a wound I would spend years learning to heal. After that night, I saw the message. Did you tell her yet? Something inside me refused to rest. Sleep stopped coming easily. Ethan would turn away in bed, and I'd stare at the glow of his phone lighting the room like a secret I wasn't supposed to see. He started coming home later. Deadlines, he said. Meetings. But even his voice felt rehearsed. Sometimes I'd catch the faint scent of a different perfume on his collar, not strong enough to accuse, but strong enough to hurt. And then there was Elaine. She became a constant presence, uninvited, unbothered, unashamed. She'd let herself in with the key, walk around in her heels, inspecting every corner like she owned it. Once I came home from the grocery store and found her in the kitchen, flipping through our mail. When I asked what she was doing, she said calmly, "You should be more careful with these. Some of these bills look heavy." It wasn't concern, it was a warning. But I was too tired, too pregnant, to fight. I started writing everything down, dates, times, what she said, what Ethan did. At first, it felt paranoid, but each note made me feel less crazy, like I was documenting my own reality before someone could rewrite it. One evening, I met Monica, my best friend since college, for coffee. The smell of espresso wrapped around us like comfort I hadn't felt in months. I told her everything, the key, the text, the perfume, Elaine's constant visits. Monica didn't interrupt. She just listened, eyes steady, expression hardening. When I finished, she said quietly, "Lila, this isn't normal. You need to start saving proof, texts, screenshots, anything, because if they're lying to you, they won't stop here." Her words settled deep in my chest. Proof. I'd never thought about it like that, like I was already in a fight I didn't know had started. That night, I waited until Ethan fell asleep. His phone was on the nightstand, screen glowing faintly. My hands shook as I opened it. I didn't want to see anything, but I needed to. And there it was, a thread labeled Apartment Docs, Elaine. Dozens of messages, attachments. Ethan had sent her our mortgage contract, the one I signed because his credit wasn't strong enough. My name was the only one on it. So why did he send it to her? Scrolling down, my stomach twisted tighter. Elaine had written, "Don't worry. She doesn't need to know. I'll handle it." I stared at those words until the screen blurred through my tears. Handle what? The contract? The house? Me? My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the clock ticking on the wall. I put the phone down and went to the bathroom, locking the door. For the first time in weeks, I let myself cry, quietly, into my hands, not because of what I found, but because deep down, I'd known it all along. The next morning, Ethan acted like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, said, "Don't wait up," and left for work. I stood at the window, watching his car disappear, and felt something new, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. That day, I called Monica. Her voice was steady, almost fierce. "Start collecting. Save the emails, the texts, keep screenshots. Write down everything Elaine says when she shows up. So I did. Every visit, every message. Elaine's tone changed. She started leaving little remarks like, "When this place is mine, I'll probably knock out that wall." She said it like a joke, but her eyes didn't smile. I started taking photos, timestamps, text threads, even a note on my fridge reminding myself, "Keep everything." It became my quiet rebellion. While they built their lies, I built my proof. Weeks passed. Elaine's messages grew bolder, and Ethan's late nights grew longer. I'd sit alone in the nursery, hand on my belly, whispering, "You'll be safe. I'll make sure you're safe, because even if I couldn't stop what they were doing, I could protect what mattered most." Then one afternoon, while folding tiny baby clothes, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Monica. "Lila, I need to see you. It's about Ethan." My fingers trembled. I didn't know it yet, but that message, that single text, was the moment my doubt would turn into truth, because soon I'd see the proof I was too afraid to imagine, and realize that the betrayal between my sister and my husband wasn't just emotional, it was a plan to take everything I'd built. When Monica's message came through, "Lila, I need to see you." "It's about Ethan." My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped my phone. For a moment I stared at the screen, frozen between fear and curiosity. Then I typed, "I'll meet you in 20 minutes." The cafe was half empty that afternoon. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the smell of wet pavement mixed with coffee. Monica sat at a corner table, her expression unreadable. When I walked in, she didn't smile, just pushed her phone across the table. "Lila," she said quietly, "you deserve to see this." On the screen was a photo, Ethan and Elaine sitting close at a downtown cafe. Elaine's hand rested on his arm, their heads leaned too close, their smiles too soft, too private. And then Monica opened a text thread she'd screenshotted. It was from Ethan's phone. Elaine's message, "Once we push her out, the house is ours." Ethan's reply, "Don't worry." She's too emotional to fight back. For a second, the world around me disappeared. The clinking cups, the hum of conversation, even the rain. All gone. All I could hear was my heartbeat, slow and heavy, like grief made audible. I didn't cry. Not then. My tears felt too proud to fall. Instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. "They planned it," I whispered. Monica nodded. "And you need to protect yourself now. No more waiting." That night, I waited for Ethan to fall asleep. The rain hadn't stopped. It whispered against the windows like the echo of my own breathing. I picked up my phone, hit record, and stepped into the living room. Then I called Elaine. When she answered, her voice was light, careless. "Lila." "Up late again? Can't sleep?" "I just need to know one thing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Why are you doing this to me?" There was a pause, a soft laugh. "Oh, Lila," she said, "you really don't get it, do you? You've always had everything handed to you. I'm just evening the scales. You can't even manage a house this size." "Ethan knows that, Ethan?" I repeated, my throat tightening. "What does he have to do with this?" Another pause. Then her voice changed, lower, sharper. "You should have stayed out of the way. Derek and I will take care of it." She stopped. A breath. Too long. She realized what she'd said. But it was too late. My heart stopped. But my mind didn't. The recorder was still running. Her words, her confession, were saved. I ended the call, shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. When I hit stop, my reflection stared back at me in the dark screen. Tired, hollow, but alive. I had proof, and I had a choice. Stay quiet or fight. The next morning, I told Monica everything. She listened in silence, then said, "We take this to a lawyer." Today, she drove me downtown to meet Laura Martinez, a real estate attorney known for being calm, but ruthless. Laura listened carefully, taking notes. When I played the recording, her eyes narrowed. "You've got more than emotion here," she said. "You've got evidence of fraud, Coercion and conspiracy. Don't let them corner you. Let's build the case before they move first. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Ethan came home late, drenched from the rain. He dropped his keys on the counter, muttered, "Rough day," and went straight to shower. I watched him. Really watched him, the man I once trusted with my life. And I saw a stranger. When he finally came to bed, I whispered, "Ethan, are you happy?" He turned, confused. "Of course." "Why?" I smiled faintly, pretending. Just wondering. Inside, I was miles away, already preparing for the fight I knew was coming. Over the next few days, Elaine's behavior became reckless. She started posting on social media about family betrayal and ungrateful sisters. Her tone was smug, performative. She wanted people to see her version first, but I stayed quiet. Because when people shout, it's usually to cover a lie. Instead, I gathered everything, screenshots, emails, text threads, the recording. And with Laura's help, I began to piece together a story even a judge couldn't ignore. Then one evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Paula, my coworker. "Lila," her message read, "I found something you should see. It's about a property transfer request. From Elaine." When she sent the document, my stomach twisted. It was an email from Elaine to a real estate firm, claiming she was the co-owner of my home. Attached was a forged signature. Mine. That's when I knew this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. They weren't only taking my trust, they were trying to erase me from my own life. I stared at that fake signature until the lines blurred through my tears. But when I wiped them away, something changed. My fear turned into focus, my heartbreak into fire. They wanted me silent. Instead, I was about to make noise they'd never forget. Because the woman who stood frozen at that party, the one who stayed quiet while her sister humiliated her, she didn't exist anymore. What remained was someone they created themselves, a woman who finally knew what she was capable of. The morning after I saw my forged signature, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood at the kitchen counter, staring at that document, letting every ounce of shock drain into stillness. For weeks, I had been the woman who waited, the one who questioned, the one who doubted. But that morning, something in me shifted. I was done waiting. I called Laura, my lawyer, and said, "It's time." Her tone didn't change. "Good," she said, "because they've already made their move. Now we make ours." We spent the next few days collecting everything: screenshots, voicemails, emails, the recording of Elaine's confession, and the transfer request Paula found, the one with my forged signature. Laura organized it all into a file so thick it could crush their lies under its weight. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "isn't just proof. It's protection." Ethan noticed my quiet. He started acting gentler, flowers on the counter, soft apologies with no words attached. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw guilt trying to disguise itself as love, and guilt never lasts. 2 weeks later, Laura filed the lawsuit: fraud, coercion, and property forgery. Elaine and Ethan were served the papers the same day. I wasn't there when they opened them, but I like to imagine the look on their faces, the confusion of people who never thought the quiet one would fight back. Elaine tried to call me that night. I didn't answer. Her voice filled my voicemail anyway. "You really think anyone's going to believe you? You're just the emotional one, the pregnant one. You'll fall apart before this even starts." But she was wrong. I wasn't falling apart anymore. I was learning how to stand. The first court hearing was 3 weeks later. The courthouse smelled like old paper and rain. I remember sitting beside Laura, my hands folded over my belly, feeling the baby's tiny kicks under my ribs, like a reminder that I wasn't fighting just for myself. When Elaine walked in, she wore white, ironic, almost cruel. Her chin was high, her smile practiced. Ethan followed behind, looking smaller than I remembered. He didn't meet my eyes. The judge began, his tone even and detached. Documents shuffled. Lawyers spoke. Every sound echoed through me. When it was my turn, Laura stood. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not just a property dispute. This is a case of manipulation and fraud, a calculated plan by the plaintiff's sister and husband to strip her of her home while she was 7 months pregnant." Elaine's lawyer objected. "There's no proof of conspiracy." Laura's expression didn't change. "Actually, there is." Then she played the recording. Elaine's voice filled the courtroom. "You should have stayed out of the way. Derek and I will take care of it." The room fell silent. Elaine's face drained of color. Her lawyer's pen slipped from his hand. Even the judge looked up. Laura continued calmly. "Additionally, we have email records showing the mortgage documents were shared without the plaintiff's consent and a forged signature attempting to transfer ownership." Ethan shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. The judge asked, "Mr. Morgan, did you send these documents to Ms. Elaine Patterson?" Ethan hesitated, one beat too long, then quietly, "Yes." I closed my eyes, not because I was shocked, but because hearing him admit it felt like closing the last chapter of a book I'd never wanted to read. The rest of the hearing blurred. Elaine tried to speak, to twist it, to cry, but the evidence stood taller than her tears. When it was over, the judge set a final date for the ruling. We walked out into the sunlight, the first sunlight that felt real in months. That evening I went home and sat in the nursery. The walls were still half painted. Tiny baby clothes hung on a line by the window. I whispered, "We did it, little one. We're almost free." Monica came by with takeout, the same pasta we used to share in college. She smiled softly. "I've never seen you this calm," she said. "Calm?" I laughed quietly. "I think it's just peace." For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive again. 2 weeks later, the final ruling came. All documents filed by Elaine and Ethan were declared fraudulent. The property remained in my name. Elaine was charged with forgery and perjury. Ethan faced civil penalties and divorce proceedings. I didn't celebrate, not loudly anyway. I just sat by the window, watching rain slide down the glass, and whispered a thank you, not to fate, not to luck, but to the quiet strength that had kept me standing. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I see you. You can breathe now." But even as I exhaled, I knew this wasn't the end. Winning in court doesn't erase the scars. It just teaches you where your power truly lives. And for me, that power was no longer in my home or in their approval. It was in my voice, the one they tried to silence. And for the first time in months, when I looked at my reflection, I saw a woman who had been broken, but not destroyed. 3 months after the final ruling, I gave birth to my daughter, Ivy Grace. The morning she arrived, sunlight spilled across the hospital room like forgiveness. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel broken, just whole. When the nurse placed her in my arms, she was so small, yet she felt like the whole world. I whispered, "You'll never have to beg for love. You'll grow up knowing your worth," and in that moment, I finally believed those words for myself, too. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just quiet. The walls smelled like fresh paint, the kind that promises new beginnings. Every morning, sunlight touched Ivy's crib, and I'd sit beside her, breathing in peace. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells, just the sound of my daughter's laughter and the kind of silence that heals. People sometimes ask if I ever forgave them, Elaine, Ethan, all of it. Maybe forgiveness isn't about saying, "It's okay." Maybe it's about looking at the scars and realizing they no longer hurt. They're just proof that you survived. One evening I rocked Ivy to sleep and caught my reflection in the window. For a second I saw the woman I used to be. Scared, desperate to please, too soft for the world. But she's gone now. In her place stands someone stronger, quieter, but unbreakable. And as I stood there, I thought about all the people who've been where I was, the ones who've had to rebuild themselves from pieces someone else broke. If you've ever been that person, I hope this story reminds you of one thing. You can rise, you can start again, and you can find peace, even after the people you loved most walked away. So if this story touched you, even a little, share it, because someone out there might need to hear it tonight, the way I once did. And if you've ever survived something that nearly destroyed you, leave a comment. Tell your story. Let's remind the world that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, I made it. And if you want to walk this journey of healing with me, like this video, subscribe to Family Stories and help me keep telling the stories that remind us what we're capable of surviving. Because in the end, betrayal didn't define me. Love did. The love I chose to give to my daughter and to myself. That night, I kissed Ivy's forehead, turned off the light, and smiled into the quiet. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I'd lost a home. I'd built one. Inside me.